the chief product officer for NEOGOV. And you guys again service different parts of the public sector, public safety part of the world, but it is fundamentally kind of an HR technology product. For the folks who don't really understand what a product person does at an HR technology company, what do they do? And you mentioned a second ago how it's evolving. What does that look like for kind of the layperson?
Yeah, maybe let me back up first and talk about NEOGOV.
Data has got to be at the core foundation of it. But one of the things that got me super excited and prepping for this with you is talking about how, because your core customer base is the public sector, you get to do more collaborative things with data that almost I can't think of any example, frankly, in the public or in the private sector of folks doing this. So can you talk about that at all? And maybe even the role that like artificial intelligence and AI plays as well?
100%. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'm a data nerd, like a huge data nerd.
I thought there was like a 50-50 shot you would show up today wearing a cape. I'm a little disappointed that you didn't, but I'll accept it nonetheless, Denise. I think it's so cool, the examples that you're using. And for those, hopefully they get to attend the Ignite conference if they haven't already. Tell me about this. So you mentioned, it's not AI coming for your jobs, but like, what are some of the ways, like, what are some of the use cases that NeoGov can help?
Yeah.
Like for different organizations?
Yeah.
Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, Denise Hemke, Chief Product Officer at NEOGOV as a part of our HR Tech Voices series. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. This podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics, workforce planning, talent intelligence, behavioral science, and understand the impacts of AI in the workplace. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to Directionally Correct Substack newsletter, where you can read Cole's articles or watch the video of the podcast. You can also see video on Spotify or YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. Feel free to check out Cole's new book, People Analytics, and everything else that's going on at colenapper.com. As always, all opinions are our own, and thanks for being a listener. Well, Denise, before we start talking about NEOGOV and why I brought you here today, I think you actually have your own podcast. What is that podcast? Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, Cole, I don't have entirely my own podcast, but I will say I do podcast for a nonprofit. So that nonprofit is called Products That Count. It's an incredible community. It actually has over 500,000 product people in that community. And so it's this luxury that I have of getting involved with that group. I've been doing their webinar series. I actually just did my last webinar for them Wednesday of this week. I've been doing it for almost 3 years. And then I've just recently moved into the podcasting side. So with that, what do I get to do? I get this luxury of connecting with a bunch of incredible product leaders, right? To meet with them, kind of understand what they're doing that's innovative, or even cover things like much softer skills. Hey, how should I think about promotability, for example, in the world of product management, and how might leaders, kind of be evaluating me against that? So a range of topics, which is really fun. And so I get to talk to them. And I like to say, for me, I kind of think it's three reasons why I do it. Number one is, I spent 12 years in engineering, and then I spent 12 years in product. And I made that shift into product at a small startup, right? And so at the time, like, I certainly took courses on product management to get some certifications and understand, how do I do the job? But I wasn't doing it in this big company, right? Where you had this framework of, oh, this is how you do product management. And then the second thing is, frankly, even if you had that framework, I think product management is rapidly evolving. And frankly, I'd say it's still evolving. It's probably another interesting topic, which is what is the future of product management? But I think for all those reasons, right, there's not like a structured, curriculum or discipline, or historically there hasn't been in colleges or institutions around it. And so it's this great way to give back to the community. I like to say, from those of us who've kind of felt around in the dark, trying to figure it out, how can we, give it back, pay it forward to others so that they aren't maybe struggling with some of those things. So that's the first reason why I do it. The second reason goes back to this incredible opportunity to network with a bunch of really smart people. And then the third piece I like to say is the forced learning. It's tightly related to the second one, but how many times have you said, "Hey, I'm going to go to, this conference, or I'm going to attend this webinar," and then your life, like your calendar, just takes over, and you don't get to go. They'll send you a recording. You still can't find time to watch the recording. And when you are hosting it, you absolutely have to be present. And so for me, I think it's kind of those three things are the reason that really keeps me doing it, now having been at it 3 years and wanting to do it, continuously.
Absolutely. Well, you are actually the chief product officer for NEOGOV. And you guys, again, service, different parts of the public sector, public safety part of the world, but it is fundamentally kind of an HR technology product. For the folks who don't really understand what a product person does at an HR technology company, what do they do? And you mentioned a second ago how it's evolving. What does that look like for kind of the layperson?
Yeah, maybe let me back up first and talk about NEOGOV, because
Yeah, sure.
I think you've actually got it mostly right, but I think there's a nuance to our business. So to the point about NEOGOV, we are, as you said, 100% focused on the public sector. So we aren't a private a product that's been built for the public sector or a private sector and then sort of been retrofit for public sector needs. And so that can be things like civil service rules, union requirements, right? Compliance with state and federal, mandates. And so our solution is really purpose built to make all of those things simpler, more transparent, and more efficient. So that's really what NEOGOV does. And let me give you two concrete examples, and I think this is where we'll get into the nuance of it.
That'd be
So
great.
the first piece is like a big portion of our portfolio is on what people would call hire to retire, right? So we do a very large portion of all state and local, government hiring. That starts with governmentjobs.com, goes all the way through payroll, right? Getting paid. And we say hire to retire. But I jokingly will say it's even past retirement, because, nowhere do we working for private sector companies get to leave and then come back to our employer and say, "But I want benefits through you even after I've retired." In government, that's actually not true. They can come back into these counties, for example, and retirees can get benefits. So it's even past kind of the hire to retire journey. But if we pick on recruiting, which is really where, kind of NEOGOV was born from, is the recruiting side of the house, public sector hiring, it isn't about this idea of move fast and break things, right? It is about fairness. It's about structure. It's about compliance, right? And so our applicant tracking system is really focused on merit-based hiring. We have things like PII blinding. We have veteran preference scoring. We have automated eligibility list. All of these are like very tailored for the government. And so it's all been purpose built from closely working with these government customers over many, many years. Frankly, 25 years. We're hitting our 25-year anniversary this year. So that's on the kind of human capital management side of the house. Then we have this other kind of side of our business, which is tightly related, right? Which is this focus on public safety. And when it comes to public safety, I like to say we are not just, a vendor that they work with. I like to, in many ways, I talk about us, as the operating system, the way they get work done. So our flagship product there is policy management. And if you can imagine a police officer, that needs to understand, hey, under what rules can I engage in a high-speed chase or not, right? And what needs to happen, right? All of those types of rules, these policies and procedures are in that policy product. And so whether it's policy management, whether it is their, field training, and this can be true for, not just police officers, but also for 911, as you can imagine, they get kind of on the job, in action training as they get into the role, or even accreditation and many, many others, right? We are really core to how they do their work. And so we are part of their operational tools. And these agencies will use both our human capital management suite and our powered DMS suite really, again, on that hire to retire journey, and then in their everyday operations. So, but I would say ultimately, our goal is, again, stay laser focused on the public sector. We talk about our mission a lot, which is to serve the people who serve the people, right? The people who are taking care of our community. And so every single thing we do is really about saying, hey, this investment that we're going to make, this feature that we're going to build, how will that make the lives of these government workers better?
I love that.
Yeah.
And just real quick, because I'm not sure if it's an acronym or not, what does DMS stand for?
A document management system, which I think it was an acronym. And actually, our flagship product, Policy, was known as Power DMS. I think maybe originally before it was called Policy. Some of that certainly predates me, but that's I think where it was that was born from. But really, our Policy product, yes, documents are in there. It can be documents beyond policies, right? It could be, hey, diagrams of a school. God forbid, officers have to be deployed to a school for some sort of emergency, or a fire has to be deployed, to a school system for some sort of emergency. So it can be a wider range of documents than policy, which is, I think, why really the original kind of name was a bit more broad. But as we've sort of built out that suite, we've gone with a very approach of really trying to be specific in how we name kind of each component of the Power DMS suite.
When I feel like to do what you all are doing, data has got to be at the core foundation of it. But one of the things that got me super excited in prepping for this with you is talking about how, because your core customer base is the public sector, you get to do more collaborative things with data that I can't think of any example, frankly, in the public or in the private sector of folks doing this. So can you talk about that at all? And maybe even the role that like artificial intelligence and AI plays as well?
100%. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'm a data nerd, like a huge data nerd. I'm an analytics person, from when I was a developer to now. So, I have always, turned to data, and I think you nailed it, which is we have the opportunity to do things with data here that I have never had the opportunity to do in a past life. Like, maybe I've been able to come close in some areas if I really squint my eyes. And I'll give you a quick example, and then I'll talk more deeply about something we're building with our early adopters right now that touches on this AI piece. So the quick example is benchmarks, right? There might be vendors out there today that say, hey, we offer benchmarks. But typically when you think about benchmarks, they have confidentiality thresholds, right? I can look at, competitors within my industry, but if I don't have benchmark data for more than 6 competitors, then I can't drill down into those benchmarks, and I can't slice that maybe by other axes. Well, our benchmarks, take our time to hire benchmark, is fundamentally different, right? You can look at the individual agencies that comprise that benchmark. So it's not just, how does my time to hire metric compare to some group, right? It's, how does my time to hire metric compare to these specific agencies? And that is, back to your point, because of this willingness to share data in a way that you just don't see in the private sector. And it's really this idea of like the rising tide raises all boats. And we're now taking that and we're leveraging that same type of willingness to share with AI. So I'll talk a little bit about this issue that's going on right now with what I would call low performing jobs in the government sector. So if you back up, from 2024 to 2025, right? The number of jobs open for the government are down by 12%. And that's no surprise, right? I mean, I'm sure you probably saw this too. There was sort of this post-COVID hiring bounce back in the private sector. And then, the private sector had the year of efficiency, as they like to call it, right? Where then everybody got really, really lean. And I think everybody has continued to kind of say lean.
Yeah. It was like, let's call it the years of efficiency.
Right. The years of efficiency is, and maybe it'll just always be, how do we run more and more efficient? I mean, none of us has kind of a crystal ball, but, I think the government, that took a little bit longer to really kind of kick into place. And so now what's happening is the number of job openings is down by 12%. And yet at the same time, the number of job applications, right, has increased by 18%. And so if we look at that, and we break that down into quartiles, what we see is that, the top quartile actually has this increased number of applicants, a significant increase in the number of applicants. I think it's 73% year on year when we look at that. And then if I were to step down from there, the second quartile is like at 19, the third is at 13 or is at 7, and the bottom is only up 1%. So in the aggregate, you say, hey, there's less jobs, there's more candidates, right? This is a great time to be an employer. But back to the quartile, so when you look inside that data, what you actually see is there's these really low performing jobs where they're struggling, and they continue to struggle, right, to get qualified applicants into the role. And so that's a challenge. And when we look into that bottom quartile, the problem is there's only 2.4 eligible candidates on average for those low performing jobs. And so I always tell people, it's like, do you know any boiler operators? I don't. Do you know any traffic signal engineers?
Better get a good training program.
Right, I don't. Yeah, and I love that comment that you made, because there are, I think, are 3 things at play, things that we've already done to help this piece of AI, which I'll finally get to at some point. But I think the piece that you said about the training program, I actually think is a really important point to touch on. We have an incredible partner Opportunity at Work, and we spend a lot of time with them. And they have done actually a really great job, I think, spending a lot of time with states, for example, and 31 states have signed on to skills-based hiring. And so back to your point about a training program, right, is, hey, where can we start to look for alternative paths of making somebody a good qualified, applicant? And it doesn't necessarily always have to come in the form of a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree. And so I love that point that you made.
Absolutely. Well, I want to dig into this a little bit deeper. So when we were prepping for this, you talked about this concept of a global library.
Yeah.
How does that relate to what we're talking about with data, and how does that kind of open new doors for the customers you serve?
Yeah. So I'll finish this piece about, what we're doing, and I'll bring that to bear. So going back to, like, what can we do? So states are embracing skills, and that's great. Then the second piece is really, if you look at jobs, what we have today inside of our product is something we call a 9-box, right? And we try to break down, conversion rates, things that, frankly, a lot of people think about in terms of, marketing, but maybe think less about in terms of hiring. How do I look at, the views that somebody's getting and the applicants, and how do I look at the conversion rates? And where conversion rates are high, don't do anything, right? Like, you're doing great. You've got great high performing jobs. Frankly, don't even necessarily spend time pushing those jobs out to more job boards, right? It doesn't make sense. And from a unit economic sense, right, from a hiring perspective, you shouldn't. But for the cases where, you don't have high conversion rates, then make sure that you advertise if you're not getting enough views, so that you can get more eyeballs on the job. And so that's where we've leaned into partnerships. Like, we have a partnership with Job Target. They have a programmatic way that can really cost effectively, and using AI. So our partners are using AI too, to optimize where they're publishing those jobs. So that's one way that we're helping. But to your point about sort of this global library, and in this case, I'm really talking more about global data, is we have built, and it's with our early adopters right now, something that we call smart job recommendations, right? Which is to say, I'm going to use the data across all of our agencies, right, that are willing to participate in this program, and use that data to optimize or to make recommendations about how you might make your job more attractive. Because if it's not getting more eyeballs on it, and I need to drive the conversion rate, we're talking about a structural change to the job, right? Do I need to offer different benefits? Do I need to change the compensation? Do I need to change the years of experience, or the education requirements? And so that's really important in the work that I mentioned before with Opportunities at Work, and kind of you rightfully picked at, right? Sort of lays the foundation for that. But with that recommendation, we can tell people, if you make these types of changes to the job, then you can anticipate seeing this many more candidates, right? We can give you that predictive intelligence because we're using data from other customers with like jobs to give you that insight. And that also then gives them assurance to say, making this change isn't going to be a problem because it has been successful for these other agencies as well. And so it's this social proof piece, which I think is also really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, like people have to see it working somewhere else to feel the confidence that they can do it themselves. I think one of the things that, thinking back to kind of some of the things you said about like how this works with data, how it's going to work with AI. Tell me about the concept of super workers and how does that play a role in kind of the value proposition for public sector organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you probably know the name Josh Bersin. He's a leading HCM analyst. I'm sure everybody, who's listening to your podcast is probably, steeped in a lot of names like that. But, you know, he coined this term, the super worker, right? Which basically said that, AI is going to supercharge people with skills. And for my own keynote for our Ignite conference, our customer conference, which is actually kicking off. This will, I think by the time this airs, it will have happened, but it's kicking off next week in Las Vegas. I'm going to be a super worker, right? My keynote, I have an 8-year-old daughter and she loves these graphic novels. And I wish that I was, some amazing illustrator. I am not. I have no skills in this department. I'm terrible. I'm terrible. If you ask me to draw something, it's pretty bad. Um, but, I sat down with ChatGPT, one Friday night and I said, "Hey, like, let's build, this super worker." And so I built this whole presentation like a graphic novel. And I did that, just me, this non-skilled illustrator. And so this to me is like one of these great examples of how AI gives you these super skills, right? It supercharged me. It made me a super worker. And so I take that back to government employees because I think there's this concern, right? Or this myth that folks have, which is, wow, AI is coming for our jobs, right? All of our jobs are going to go away. And I think the reality of it is we need to keep the human in the loop, especially when it comes to things like human capital management and when it comes to, public safety, right? We're talking police and fire, very physical jobs. We're not coming for people's jobs. We're giving them AI tools to make them super workers. So I like to think about it as we're putting a cape on these individuals and making them all kind of superheroes. Hence, bringing it back to the graphic novel. That's where my inspiration came from, was, putting that cape on these public sector workers. And so I'll be talking about AI, like that example we just talked about, in terms of the low performing jobs. And there's other AI products that we have that are in market today that our customers are using incredibly successfully. And then I'll also be talking about some of the things that are on the horizon, which are going to make them, even more of a super worker.
I thought there was like a 50-50 shot you would show up today wearing a cape. I'm a little disappointed that you didn't, but I'll accept it nonetheless, Denise. I think it's so cool the examples that you're using, and for those, hopefully they get to attend the Ignite conference if they haven't already. Tell me about this. So you mentioned it's not AI coming for your jobs, but like what are some of the ways? Like what are some of the use cases that NEOGOV can help?
Yeah.
Like for different organizations?
Yeah. So let me start on the public safety side. So we talked a little bit about policy, right? An officer or a 911 agent needs to be able to understand when they're taking that call in the moment, right? What is the policy? What is the procedure that they need to follow? And so I think one of the best examples that I can give you on this, so the product that I'm going to talk about is a product that we call Recall. And one of the best examples is with one of our customers, Cincinnati ECC. So Emergency Communication Center, again, 911. So they were struggling, I think, with some familiar challenges that we heard, which is, these policies get pushed out, people read them, right? People sign them. And let's be honest, we don't always internalize them, right? I like to, use the analogy of, an employee handbook. when you've signed an employee handbook, do you remember what's in that employee handbook? Do you remember all of it? Probably not.
I mean, that's under the assumption I even read it, but yeah.
Right. And I think, these individuals in public safety certainly take it a little more seriously than maybe you or I do, reading the employee handbook. But nevertheless, I mean, these are long documents if you look at them in aggregate, right? And the challenge is for things that occur often, sure, they probably remember them. They're always top of mind. But what about for those things that maybe occur less frequently? And so what recall does is it does something we call time-based repetition learning. So I'm going to rewind us all back to our college days. Those flashcards that you would make, when you're studying for a test. And if you got it, right, you'd stick it in one pile. You got it wrong, you stick it in another pile. And, you kept taking the wrong pile again and again until you got it all right. And of course, periodically, you'd roll back into the ones you got right just to make sure you still remember those two. So recall does effectively that same thing, right? It's a dealer's algorithm. We're dealing out, these cards to make sure that people get them right. We're supercharging that with AI because we're saying, hey, you person who's responsible for training, you don't manually need to create these cards. I mean, I don't know about you, but that was like hours of time I felt like writing out cards. And even the digital version of creating test questions would still take a long time. And so these agencies are doing this in a digital way. They take a policy and they highlight it. And they say, hey, make me cards from this. Right. And so the AI can automatically create these cards to test policy understanding, which is great because if they find, hey, this is a pocket or an area where we need to increase employee knowledge, then they can be very targeted. Right. And they can also have these like broad-based approaches too. And I think the best part about that is that allows them to do this at scale. So we've seen agencies creating over 600 cards on these standard operating processes and procedures, and it makes it fun, right? This is, training that I can do in my downtime at work. It's not like I have to step aside like those security awareness kind of or security training classes we all might take annually that take an hour or 2 hours or however long of our time, which it's hard, right? Especially in a place where you need people in seat taking these calls, finding that time is tough. And so taking these cards in a fun way allows them to drive up that compliance. And what we saw was in 100 days after using this product, their entire agency increased by 10 percentage points in terms of compliance, right? Or awareness of the policy. And to me, I think that that's really powerful because I'm not talking about you or I went from scoring an 80 to a 90. I'm talking everybody increased by 10%. And so that is really impactful, number one. But I think more impactful is that we saw the outcomes, right? We saw better classification, or they saw better classification of these high risk calls. Take something like a welfare check. And so everybody was able to become more compliant, to provide better services to our citizens out there through the use of this. And it took minutes versus something that would have historically taken hours. So I think that's one great example that I can talk about of where we're actively helping.
No, that's awesome as an example. And I think one of the things you told me is about kind of like the conversational interface and agentic experiences. We hear about these buzzwords a lot. Well, what does that mean in your product?
Yeah. So in terms of the conversational interface, I will go back to those policies, right? And these could be policies for HR, but I'll use, the example in policing, right? What do I do when I'm coming up on a hazardous waste spill? Again, hopefully something that occurs pretty infrequently, but probably not something that you maybe know in the policy manual. So yes, we're trying to, get people to learn things through recall, but I like to believe in the belt and suspenders approach. So if educating them, right, with recall is the belt, I'll also take the suspenders, which is, how can I also make those quick answers at their fingertips by giving them access to policy search so that they can, in a conversational way, ask. And it could be something like the hazardous waste bill. It could also be something like, am I allowed to grow a beard? Right? These are things that people in law enforcement want to know and they want to get answers to those questions. And now they don't need to go to HR or a supervisor or spend cycles. They get those answers fast and they get them, especially in these moments when they need them the most. And so that's one example on the search side. We are certainly moving into the agentic side of the house. We'll be spending a lot of time on that next year. Our first area of concentration on that, though, is back to more kind of classic HR, which is employee and manager self-service experiences, right? These jobs are tough. I have a brother-in-law who's a homicide detective. I have a sister who's a teacher. These jobs are hard jobs. They're emotionally taxing jobs. And the last thing that somebody wants to do is, get into their HR system, try to do something that they don't do very often, right? Maybe they had a life event, they're having a baby, whatever it is. And it's like, oh, how do I go and kind of enter that into the system so that, I can start the leave management process? And if something I do infrequently, why not, right? Just use an agent to start to kick off those processes for them so that they don't have to navigate around. And I really think, to me, yes, we can talk about saving minutes or shaving minutes here and there, but I think the value back on this one is back to HR case deflection, right? HR doesn't have to kind of field these types of questions, and employee satisfaction, right? I mean, we all have these amazing, where is my phone? I like to say these like supercomputers in our pocket that we've all grown up on, or maybe not grown up on in my case, but the newer generation is growing up on them. And so they expect these experiences. Now they're getting used to experiences like ChatGPT. And so we can't have them then turn around and come into their tools where they're expected to get work done for their job and not be able to provide them that same level of quality experience. And so I think that employee satisfaction piece, and how do we then, retain these employees, that's where actually this agentic piece, I think, is really going to help.
Well, earlier you mentioned that one of the biggest challenges in hiring in the public sector is sometimes like there might even be like 1 or 0 applicants for a job. What does the public sector do differently, and how do you guys enable that to deal with that challenge?
Yeah. So it is one of the places, again, I think what we have today is to say, how can you advertise more, right? To get more eyeballs on it. The second piece is, how can we guide you in terms of the structural changes that you can make to the job? But the third piece that that we'll be starting to address, and we're starting to work on now, is to say, how do we open the aperture for the candidate? Right? It's back to this skills thing that we touched on before, and you're quite the skills expert. So I'd love to hear your take on some of these things too. But as a candidate coming in, there are skills of one job that are applicable to another job. And so if I just look at job title matching, right, then I may not recommend jobs to you that, because they don't match the job title of a job that you've previously held or you currently hold. But if I actually start to look at the skills that you have earned, through these experiences that you've had, then we can open the aperture to say, well, what of those skills you have, how do those align to a broader set of jobs? And so I think that that's one of the last pieces. I won't say it's the last piece, because I'm sure there will be a lot more that we need to do in this vein. But to really start to open the aperture for the candidate on jobs that they would have previously maybe not considered, but that they have the skills to do.
Well, skills adjacencies are so important. And you mentioned like opportunity at work earlier. Some of my prior colleagues now work there. So it's a great organization. I'm also thinking about, you mentioned earlier the governmentjobboards.com. And this concept, like, I just love the example you used earlier, interagency benchmarking, where you can actually benchmark to an organization rather than a collection of nameless groups.
Yep.
But I think you can probably do the same thing with interagency sharing of job applicants, right?
Yeah. And we actually do this today. So governmentjobs.com today, if you come in and let's say you apply for a job, and I live in Nevada, when I say, hey, I want to apply for a job with with Novato, then there's an opportunity as an applicant to check the box and say, I'm willing to share my profile. And again, this goes back to exactly the point you're highlighting, which is this willingness to share data. And so using our Attract product, our candidate relationship management product, you can also look across any of these applicants that have said they are willing to share their profile. And so that is, again, the other way that we can, from the agency side of the house, look at this broader candidate pool and make sure that we're not missing out on qualified people. And so we're really trying to attack this problem on multiple fronts. It's back to us being really deeply committed to our mission about we serve the people that serve the people. We believe it's really important to get these people in seat, for these communities because they're holding critical roles. And, we owe it to them as a company to try to unlock this issue, that they have, which is how do they get the right people into these lowest quartile jobs?
Absolutely. Well, I think we may have kind of glossed over it earlier talking about NEOGOV, but you being the chief product officer there, background in engineering, now a background in product. How is that different now in 2025, and how is that evolving as we move forward, like the product function itself?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that product management, there's always been sort of this mix of like technical product managers, people like me that came in from engineering, QA. I was at a conference yesterday, and folks in data science who make that shift to the product managers that I would call, domain experts, right? We have a lot of product managers, who maybe came out of government themselves, for example. And I think no matter whether you are technical or not, I think the core skill of product management, especially in this new day and age, is just, curiosity, right? The other thing I would say is customer obsession. And that's critical, but curiosity. And I think curiosity is going to be more and more critical because of these open questions around how the role is changing. So what do I mean by that? There are product leaders out there today, the CPO for Optimizely, for example, who will say, product management is dead. And that's a strong statement, right?
Very provocative.
Very provocative. And I think as a product manager, you say, wow, that's kind of terrifying. What's the future of my job going to be, in that world? And Clairvaux is her name. And when you talk to Clairvaux, I had the luxury of interviewing her on that Products That Count podcast. Claire will say, as you unpack that statement, it's not that product management is dead. It's that, she'll describe it maybe as a product builder or an experience builder. When you talk to a lot of CPOs, we haven't converged on the right language, but it is because we are taking AI tools and we are making our product managers super workers. And so I'll even take myself. I personally this year started playing with a product called Lovable, and I played with a product called Bolt, and I played with another one called Replit. We ended up, choosing Replit as our de facto tool of choice. But what does this product do? This product allows you to build product, right, just through a prompt. And, I will jokingly say, despite my background in engineering, nobody wants my code anymore. But I think people would love the results of my prompt. These tools are still in different stages of, can they actually make, production quality code? Maybe not, but if we fast forward some irrefutable period of time, they certainly will be able to, right? They are on that trajectory, they are on that path. But what they do is they allow product managers to rapidly iterate with real live working prototypes within minutes. Right. And now I can put that in the hands of a customer and say, is this what you mean? And it's not just a screenshot. It's not just me talking about it. It's not a designer that has had to spend this time making this clickable demo to emulate this end-to-end experience. This is something that I can spin up in minutes. And it's so easy, in fact, that my 8-year-old daughter and I did it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm sure that many parents have a chore board, right? We have a chore board on our fridge, and she can earn some hearts. And when she earns hearts, they go into a bank, and then she can cash those in. And so we built an app to do that. And so that actually became my hello world to test, these three different applications to say, how good are they? How much control can I get in them? What kind of output do they produce? And so I think that piece of curiosity really is a key skill in product management. I think that you absolutely have to be customer obsessed, but you have to be really curious and willing to get your hands dirty and really play with these types of products. And so, I think that I would say to technical product managers, people like myself, I think the challenge has always been, hey, how do you make sure that you stay in your swim lane and not get into the engineering swim lane and really truly focus on the customer need? And for these, domain experts, the challenge is going to be, get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Because, you've got to start using these tools. And again, none of us has a crystal ball to say, what is it going to be like in the next 2 to 3 years? But I very much see a world in which product and design and even front end engineering, parts of this are really converging. And so whether it's experience builder or product builder, there is this path that we are emerging towards. And I think folks need to embrace it, because if you don't embrace AI, then the person who does, and everybody is saying this, is going to be the person in the seat, because these tools are coming, and this is going to be the way that companies can actually really innovate as we go forward.
Absolutely. Well, Denise, do you want to join me in Cole's Corner?
Yeah, let's do it.
Welcome to Cole's Corner. Let's do some Cole's Corner. So I hear you're a Floridian at heart,
I am.
but you now live in Northern California in wine country. So I want to do some rapid fire with you. What is the best wine in Napa County?
Oh, geez. I don't know about the best wine in Napa County, but I'm a bubbles kind of girl. So I like to hit up like a Gloria Ferrier or the Domaine Chandon kind of winery if I'm out this way. I just did that with some friends not too long ago.
And what makes it special and unique, and why that one?
I mean, I just love the bubbles, but I will also say the views are just stellar, right? The views are just stellar. So if you haven't had the opportunity to go wine tasting, I highly recommend it. Make sure you go to some of these wineries that just have these exceptional views. It's just such a treat to like sit up there, on the mountaintop and stare out over this incredible scenery in the California sun and drink some bubbles.
Absolutely. Well, what's the place you've never been to that you most like to go, and why?
I want to go to Japan. I think my daughter wants to go for the cherry blossoms. I want to go for the culture and all the sushi. I mean, who doesn't want to go for that?
That's a common answer. It's interesting. I think the biggest challenge to me with Japan is just the time zone difference.
Yeah.
It's so far, like, all of East Asia is kind of suffers from the same problem, in Australia, New Zealand as well. Long flight, big time difference. It just makes it hard to just go over there for a few days. You have to go for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
But big question: why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do?
Yeah.
I love people. And I mentioned a little bit about engineering and kind of making the pivot from engineering into product. Uh, After I made that pivot, I'll maybe just tell you a little bit of a story.
Yeah.
I was at a startup. I was employee number 32 at that startup, and we were around 100 something people. And then we got acquired by Workday. And at the time, they said, hey, you're not going to focus on all those use cases anymore that you've been doing. You're going to focus on a very different set of use cases. We were a big data analytics startup. You're going to focus on people and money, right? Workforce and financials. Such a shift for me. That wasn't, something that most of our customers were doing. I think we had one customer kind of doing workforce type of analytics with our big data product. And I really fell kind of in love with this, challenge of people. I jokingly have said that my career could be called Denise and the Dudes, and that is not a cool band. That is just my life. And it's because I grew up in engineering, and I grew up in engineering in pretty technical areas like monitoring and management and analytics. And even the word analytics, is technically, if you would run it through a lot of these kind of tools that would say, is that more of a male term or a female term? It's more of a male term. And I'm like, wow, well, I'm never going to be able to post a job, to appeal to women if analytics, is a term I can't even use. So knowing my own life's experiences and knowing that, there's just not a lot of women oftentimes in these roles. When I had the opportunity at Workday to launch a product like People Analytics that really looked at, some of the data to say, hey, why might maybe women be leaving an organization? That was really one of I think the linchpins for me to be doing what I'm doing. I then went from there to a company called Checker, who's a background check company, and background checks are certainly a data problem. That's a very interesting and challenging space. But what I liked most about that job is, to me, getting the background check done is time to first paycheck, right? For many, many people, that really matters because they don't have this, life savings that they can use while they're not in a job that is paying them. And so if I can make that background check faster, it means they can get paid faster. And that is good for them, and it's good for us as a society. And so all of that really led me to NEOGOV, right? Which is where I get this incredible HR platform that is truly purpose-built for the government sector. And I have this incredible public safety suite, part of which we focus on wellness of these officers, which we could talk about certainly. And I can look in the mirror and say, I'm building a business, right? I am satisfying customer needs, but I'm also hopefully making the world a little bit better of a place while I do that.
Well, you brought it up. Talk about the wellness needs and why is that a passion area for you?
Yeah. So I have a brother-in-law who is a homicide detective. And so, I personally know how this weighs on these officers, right? And, if you look at public safety agencies, things like suicide, which is horrible to think about, but that impacts them. And it impacts them because this job does weigh on them. And so one of the products that we have, it's an early intervention product. We call it Power Vitals. Think about vitals like, taking your blood pressure, your heart rate, getting a sense of how you're doing. It's called early intervention, and it's early intervention because we want to make sure that we're getting ahead of issues. If you think about maybe what an officer might go through, or a 911 operator, they don't always have the same shift supervisor. So I don't know, hey, Cole, did you go out on a bunch of incidents today that were really, not very traumatic, kind of run the business? Or did you go out on a bunch of incidents today, or one incident today that was really impactful, right? Take something like a school shooting, right? A very serious topic. An officer could be dispatched to that. Imagine that officer is a parent, which makes that even more traumatic for them. And not even because their own kids are at the school, but it's just more that you feel, right, for what is happening. We are all humans. And, if you go out to this, expected school shooting or reported school shooting, you could disarm the shooter, right? And everything could turn out just fine. And that's still, I would say, is probably a low trauma score, because just your blood pressure going up and even talking about it, I feel like my blood pressure raises. It's a lot to think about. And then there's the other extreme, which could be a worst case scenario, right? Where you go out and something really horrible did happen. And I think a lot of times we think about the victims of those shootings, and we should, like that, the victims, the community, all those people are really impacted. But I think sometimes we fail to think about those officers. And so what we do is we actually use AI to score what we CAD notes. So CAD is computer automated dispatch, right? It's the notes when you call the 911 operator that they take about the event. And so we've worked with clinicians, and we've worked with subject matter experts, like officers, who have done this in the field. And we have trained our model to score these computer automated dispatch notes so that we can look at the cumulative trauma score that they have undergone, right? Did I go out to that school shooting, right? And it was the worst case scenario. That's high trauma. And so in those scenarios, we need to make sure that those officers are getting the help that they need. So a lot of early intervention systems are these kind of gotcha systems, like, oh, bad cop, don't do that, right? our system takes a very fundamentally different approach. We really focus on officer, or I would say first responder wellness, to make sure that, we understand when things are happening and to help them make sure that they have what they need, for their own personal wellness and the wellness of the people around them. And we couple that with a product that we call Line, where not just they, but also their family members can get access as well in an anonymized way to get access to resources, to be able to tap into, peers that can help consult them, that type of thing.
All right, I've got one last big question for you.
All right.
So you're a product person now, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the most difficult part about starting, like building a product from scratch? So it's just a white sheet of paper, there's nothing there, and then going to having a successful product. And like, what are your hacks for going, getting past that just blank sheet of paper stage to building something that's successful?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the hardest things is making sure that you just don't go out and just build what already exists in the market, right? How is what you're going to offer different? And so to me, I think the hack is go spend a lot of time with the people who are going to use your product. I know that I feel like I'm stating the obvious, but I think that this is a step, that people often miss, like immerse yourself in it. If you can shadow somebody doing that job, I feel like, I've gotten a lot of insight around public safety because I've done ride-alongs, because I've been in the 911 centers. I'm not a public safety person. I've only been in this role for a year and a half, but I've had to really immerse myself in this community so that, I can really internalize what is it that these individuals need, right? And I would say product people need to immerse themselves in the needs of their users, like really, and this, I love that word, obsess about it, right? It needs to be the thing that, keeps you up at night, which is like, I don't know them well enough. How can I know them more? How can I know like the nuances of their jobs so that I can build the thing that is best for them and is also differentiated from what they can get today in the market? Because if they aren't using those tools today and they're willing to consider using, or they're using a tool, but they're willing to consider switching to your tool, it must be because you are doing something different and better. And so I think that that is probably the most critical advice, that I would give to somebody.
So that is really stellar. And Denise, I have really appreciated getting to know you not only as a human being, but getting to learn about all the really cool work you guys are doing at NEOGOV. Before we wrap up, any final words you want to share with the audience?
I guess I would just say, for those of you that didn't get to attend Ignite Live, if you are listening to this, please get out there, listen to the material. I think that you will find, and hopefully you learned a lot today in terms of what NEOGOV is doing, but our goal is really to serve the people who serve the people. And then also, I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. And I'm talking about your audience. If this is something that they're passionate about too, this is how I get steeped in the needs of our users, is to make sure that I'm constantly, reaching out and connecting with people that we aren't serving today or people that we serve today, but I can do more to serve them even better.
Yeah. Please reach out to NEOGOV, learn about what they're doing, reach out to Denise. I hear there's a great graphic novel floating around. Maybe it's out there for sale. Who knows? But this has been a fantastic podcast. Thanks so much for joining, Denise. So you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott. And today's guest, Denise Hemke, Chief Product Officer at NEOGOV, as a part of our HR Tech Voices series. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Cole.